Hello everybody and welcome to DT December, short for Doug the Dog 6ember. This is an idea that I've had for a while now that may sound a bit familiar if you've ever watched Dragon Ball Z Abridged back in the day, because this is an idea that I've quite literally ripped off from its creators. See, up until a few years ago, Team 4-Star used to do their own series called DBcember, where they would compile and count down a list of their top 12 or 24 things related to a Dragon Ball topic, be it movies, moments, fights, or whatever else they felt like counting down. Sadly, they announced in 2021 that that season of DBcember would be the last, but in the spirit of what those amazing human beings used to bring us throughout the most wonderful time of the year, I've decided to create my own version of it here on my own channel. And that's why, throughout these 25 days of Christmas, I will be counting down a list of my own. But of course, if I'm going to create my own list, I need to figure out what to list. So after the idea for DT December was born, I got to work at considering some options. What could I count down? Well, I'm pretty much a GTA YouTuber nowadays, so I guess it should be something GTA related. GTA video games? Nah, that's too broad of a topic and maybe a bit too controversial. And maybe a bit too obvious too. I could try talking about the best GTA 6 trailer 2 release date conspiracy theories. I suppose that could be fun. Or, you know what might make for a great topic? GTA's greatest villains. So that's when I got to work. I sat down, I looked at all the villains throughout Grand Theft Auto's history, considered what made them so great, and put together a list of my top 12 of them, which will be progressively unveiled every other day throughout the month until the greatest GTA villain of all time is crowned on Christmas Day. But of course, in order to come up with a list like this, I had to create some ground rules for who I consider to be a villain, as well as who is even eligible in this list to begin with. Starting off, and I'm sure I'll get some hate for this, I'm only counting villains from 3D or HD GTA games. That means no GTA's 1 or 2, no GTA Advance, and even no Chinatown Wars. The reason I'm putting this restriction in place is because I've played through every Grand Theft Auto besides these ones. And while I do plan on playing these ones as well one day, I don't want to rush my experience for the sake of the series. Plus, I feel like comparing 2D era GTA villains to 3D era GTA villains might be like comparing apples to oranges. So for those reasons, none of those games' villains will be included in my list since I literally cannot judge any of them. With those games disqualified, it's time to classify exactly which villains from the rest of the series are eligible for consideration. To keep things simple, I'll only be including main antagonists in this countdown, i.e. characters who remain one of or the primary opposing threat until the end or near the end of the story. So characters who are killed off early in the grand story, like Ryder in San Andreas, Ricardo Diaz in Vice City, or Vincenzo in Liberty City stories, they are not considered main villains and will therefore not be considered in this list. Additionally, in the games where there are multiple antagonistic parties that survive until the end of the game, all of those parties can be considered main villains, regardless of who the writers intend to be the true main antagonist. That's pretty much it as far as my rules go, so with that, let's get ready to kick off DT December with my top 12 villains of Grand Theft Auto. I'll be back on Tuesday with a full-fledged short video giving you number 12, and I encourage you all to let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with that entry. As a matter of fact, comment right now and let me know how excited you are for DT December, and feel free to tell me some of your own favorite GTA villains. And if you guys end up enjoying this series, maybe we'll make DT December a yearly thing. Other than that, that's all from me. I hope to see you guys in a couple of days, and I hope to keep seeing you all throughout the month. Have a blessed day, everybody. This is your boy Doug the Dog 6, and I am signing off. Hello everybody, and welcome to the first official episode of DT December, a series in which I'll be counting down my top 12 GTA villains of all time. If you want more info on this series, feel free to check out my previous video where I explain the rules of my list, as well as how this series is going to work in general. But without any further ado, my number 12 entry into this list is Massimo Torini from Liberty City Stories. In this title, we play as Tony Cipriani of the Leone crime family at a time when the Sicilian Mafia arrives in Liberty City with the intent of taking over the town's criminal underworld. In order to do this, the mob of the old country sparks turmoil within Liberty City's three main mafia families, manipulating them into weakening each other so that Torini's family can swoop in and conquer them all. Additionally, both the Sicilians and the Leones get involved in the town's mayoral politics as they each have their own vested interests in the two candidates, and thus each try to get their man into office. The Sicilians prove to be worthwhile antagonists, as their influence in the city legitimately threatens the survival of the Leone crime family, with Torini's actions leading to Salvatore Leone being arrested following the rigged election of Miles O'Donovan to the mayor's office. But in the end, Tony and Salvatore overpower Torini and his forces and knock them onto the back foot, leaving them begging for peace before we confront and kill the game's main villain himself in the final mission of the game. But as interesting as our Sicilian opposition makes this game, I think Torini as the face of their operation ends up being a rather weak antagonist at the end of the day. Sure, the Sicilians nearly topple the Leone Empire under his leadership, but at least from a narrative perspective, he himself doesn't really do much to leave a lasting impact on the series, and it's because of his lack of exposure in the story. I'll be honest, when I played through this game, game, I didn't even realize he was the Sicilian boss until the finale because he'd only appeared in one random tailing mission before then. And even after it was all said and done, I was still left thinking that this guy was meant to be the game's main antagonist. And be honest with me, how many of you thought the same thing until just now? For that matter, how many of you even remember Massimo Torrini at all? Unlike the villains of Grand Theft Auto games future and prior, Massimo Torrini isn't all that memorable as a character since there really isn't that much to remember about him, apart from his awesome mustache. If he had more appearances in the game, I'm sure he could have earned a higher rank in my list of GTA villains. But in spite of his threatening status and everything that he did to nearly defeat our protagonist, the lack of screen time he suffers from has greatly diminished him as a character in my eyes. That's not to say that he's the worst villain in Grand Theft Auto though, just merely that he is the 12th best on my list of greatest GTA villains of all time. But in order to have earned that rank, there had to have been 11 characters who fit this role better than he did, and in a couple of days I'll unveil my pick for the number 11 spot on this list. So until then, feel free to let me know down below what you think of Torrini, Liberty City Stories, or just this video in general. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all have a blessed couple of days, and I'll see you guys on Thursday. This is your boy Doug the Dog 6, and I am signing off. Hello everybody, and welcome back to DT December, a series in which I'll be counting down my top 12 GTA villains of all time. If you want more info on this whole thing, feel free to check out my first video in this series where I explain the rules of my list. Or if you haven't seen my previous DT December videos and want to avoid spoilers, check out this playlist to watch every prior entry up to this point. Today, I'll be talking about my number 11 entry into this list, Sonny Forelli from Vice City. I know how controversial it's going to be to put the antagonist of such a beloved game so low on a list like this, but just hear me out as I explain my reasoning. Unlike how Liberty City Stories waited about half the game to introduce us to his main antagonist, Vice City wastes no time in doing so as he's given the very first line in the game. In the opening cutscene, Sonny discusses his plan to use the freshly released from prison Tommy Vercetti to set up shop for the Forellis down in Vice City, and in a few months' time, Sonny and his men will head down there to take over the operations. Within the next couple of cutscenes, we see the first stage of his plan begin to unfold as Tommy takes part in a drug deal for the Forellis. But after the deal is shot up by a third party, our protagonist is forced to call his boss and inform him that we failed to acquire the drugs and lost the cash. Sonny doesn't take the news very well.
That was my money, Tommy! My money!
So in an effort to save his own ass, Tommy does his best to assure him that he'll recover the money and the drugs and will cast his revenge upon the ambushing party. Sonny vaguely threatens Tommy in response, and then this is the last that we really hear of him for a while. Throughout the course of the game, Tommy gets to work on slowly building his empire down in Vice City, first by working for the drug lord Ricardo Diaz, then by killing Diaz and taking over his business, and then by buying up properties to expand the business. And throughout this time, our only interactions with Sonny are through these occasional phone calls where he merely reminds us of his presence, since it can be pretty easy to forget that the main antagonist even exists with everything else going on in this town. Each of these phone calls become progressively more aggressive as Sonny tries to pose himself as a threat, with the last one consisting of him literally screaming at Tommy through the phone while our protagonist doesn't even care enough to respond. But since all these threats have been so empty, it's kind of hard to really take the man seriously. Finally, after becoming sick of waiting for Tommy to repay his debts, Sonny sends some Forelli mobsters down to Vice City to tax our businesses, leading to our protagonist swiftly eliminating them. With all other avenues exhausted, our antagonist finally takes matters into his own hands by traveling down to Vice City himself to confront Tommy, prompting this admittedly badass showdown between these two opposing forces that refuse to back down from the other. Then following a brief shootout against the Forellis as well as Lance, who we'll get back to, don't worry, we get this pretty pathetic final boss fight where we put Sonny down and get ready to settle down as the king of Vice City. While Sonny Forelli gets more exposure than Massimo Torrini from Liberty City Stories, his time on screen still feels very limited, which makes it hard to give him a higher ranking on this list. I feel like an argument could even be made to put him below Torrini, since the latter villain gave his respective protagonist more trouble than Sonny really gave Tommy in the grand scheme of things. But given Sonny's greater memorability, be it due to the charisma of his voice actor Tom Sizemore, or due to his comedic outbursts, it only feels right to put him above Torrini. However, once again, due to his lack of exposure in the story, that can get to the point where I wouldn't blame you for forgetting that he's even the main villain of the story, while you're busy defending Tommy's cats and dogs against the Haitians. Sorry, what I meant to say was while you're busy fending off so-and-so. And I can't blame you if you forgot about him, because he and his men literally do nothing to pose a threat until the final two missions of the game. And for those reasons, Sonny Forelli earns the number 11 spot on my list of greatest GTA villains of all time. Do you agree with me? Or do you feel that Sonny deserves a higher or lower spot? Let me know in the comment section down below. And if you're enjoying the series so far, feel free to leave a like on this video, and subscribe if you haven't done so already so that you'll be notified this Saturday when I return with my number 10 entry into this list. So until then, have a blessed next couple of days, and I will see you all again soon. This is your boy Doug the Dog 6, and I am signing off. Hello everybody and welcome back to DT December, a series in which I'll be counting down my top 12 GTA villains of all time. If you want more info on this whole thing, feel free to check out my first video in this series where I explain the rules of my list. Or if you haven't seen my previous DT December videos and want to avoid spoilers, check out this playlist to watch every prior entry up to this point. Today, I'll be talking about my number 10 entry into this list, Billy Gray from Grand Theft Auto 4, The Lost and Damned. Billy is a pretty interesting character to me. When we're first introduced to him, we see our protagonist, Johnny, symbolically hand the leadership of the Lost MC back to the true president as he's released from jail. However, after they return to the clubhouse, we see the president and vice president's ideologies clash as they argue about retrieving Billy's bike from the Angels of Death, a rival motorcycle club. After tensions rise as Johnny argues that the club needs to focus on business and its survival while Billy argues back that the president's bike is more important, Johnny reluctantly agrees to get his bike back, after which Billy calms things down and reminds our protagonist of the two's brotherhood in a rather manipulative way. After the bike is recovered, our following missions with Billy revolve around starting a war with the Angels of Death in order to steal some heroin off of them, and our president shows how low he's willing to go politically as he uses the death of our lost brother Jason as an excuse to attack them in the first place. Once again, Johnny and Billy's ideologies clash as our protagonist knows how unwise it would be to wage a war with the Angels of Death. But Billy reminds us that he's the president, so it's his call. With Johnny questioning each of Billy's decisions, as well as failing to sell the heroin due to a sting operation, the president begins to doubt his loyalty, and so he attempts to double-cross Johnny by offering him up to the Triads, whom the heroin originally belonged to, in exchange for peace. Of course, our protagonist manages to fight his way out of the situation, but during the chaos, Billy gets arrested again and is sent to prison, forcing Johnny to take over as acting president of the Lost once more. Some of Billy's loyalists see this as a power play from Johnny, and opt to revolt against his leadership and spark a brief civil war which ultimately leaves the gang weaker than ever. While Billy may be absent for the majority of the rest of the game, his influence is still felt as he acts against Johnny from behind the scenes, whether it's through his followers breaking off and fighting against our protagonist as I just mentioned, by convincing Ray Bacino that we're not to be trusted, or by snitching on Johnny to get himself into witness protection. His actions on the inside ultimately lead to the downfall of the Lost MC, and while he may get his comeuppance in the final mission of the game, it's hard to say that he didn't get the last laugh in the end, especially when you consider the turn Johnny's life takes following the events of this story. Despite not being the most memorable antagonist in this series, Billy Gray is a remarkable character for how captivating of a villain he really is. He may not be very complex, but he's a character you're clearly meant to try to like, since he's supposed to have our protagonist's best interest at heart, who turns out to be a manipulative piece of shit who's willing to backstab his so-called brothers after they've shown him how much they would have sacrificed for him. He's a good character who serves his purpose well, and if the story were any longer, I think an argument that he's on par with a similar character, Red Dead Redemption's Dutch Vanderland, wouldn't be too far-fetched. However, much like how my previous two entries, Massimo Torrini and Sonny Forelli suffered heavily from a lack of time on screen, Billy Gray suffers from a lack of time to tell his story due to how short The Lost and Damned is. For those reasons, I can only put him as high as the number 10 spot on this list of the greatest GTA villains of all time. But what do you think? Do you agree with this placement? Or do you believe Billy deserves a higher spot, or maybe that he should be below Sonny or Torrini? Tell me down below, and while you're there, if you're enjoying this series so far, feel free to leave a like on this video, and subscribe if you haven't done so already so that you'll be notified this Monday when I return with the number 9 entry for this list. But until then, have a blessed couple of days, and I'll see you all then. This is your boy Doug the Dog 6, and I am signing off. Hello everybody and welcome back to DT December, a series in which I'll be counting down my top 12 GTA villains of all time. If you want more info on this whole thing, feel free to check out my first video in this series where I explain the rules of my list. Or if you haven't seen my previous DT December videos and want to avoid spoilers, check out this playlist to watch every prior entry up to this point. Today, I'll be talking about my number 9 entry into this list, Catalina from Grand Theft Auto 3. Those of you who've seen my recent video where I criticized GTA 3 for its faults may be surprised to see that this game's main antagonist made the cut for a list like this. But even though this game's story is, well, utter dog shit, I can't deny how powerful of a villain Catalina truly is. In the very first cutscene of the game, we're introduced to her through her betrayal of our main character Claude, as she shoots him in the face and leaves him for dead during a bank heist. From then on, she only makes a handful of physical appearances throughout the rest of the game, but whether we can see her or not, we can feel the effects of the strings she pulls from behind the scenes as her gang's primary export, Spank, remains a constant driving force through most of the game's events, be it via the Leone Mafia's struggles to suppress the Colombian cartel's influence in Portland, or the Yakuza's full-on war with the cartel that Claude finds himself on the forefront of, Catalina's actions in Liberty City continually result in our protagonist combating her forces in one way or another. And while Catalina may not have a lot of screen time in this game, in each of the cutscenes she does appear in, she remains an intimidating and powerful figure. Whether it's when she betrays us at the very beginning of the game, when she belittles the Leone rat for selling out his mafia family for spank, when she sacrifices her new business partner Miguel to make her escape, or when she double-crosses Claude again in the final mission, she never really looks weak at any point, unlike the previous villains I've already talked about. She doesn't pathetically ask for peace like Tarini, she doesn't lose her cool like Sunny, and she doesn't come up short like Billy. In every one of her appearances, she remains in control of the situation, or if she is on the back foot, she shows that she's not afraid to cut her losses to make a strategic retreat. Hell, not only does she never really look weak, I'd argue she may be one of the strongest antagonists I've ever seen in a GTA game, given how swiftly and coldly she eliminates the protagonist's closest ally, Asuka. It's not until we kill her at the end of the story that we finally feel like we've gotten the best of her. But even during that mission, she never shows any sign of fear of failure and remains valiant as she tries to fend off Claude all the way until her ultimate defeat. Just like the previous entries though, Catalina's strength as a villain is crippled by her lack of screen time. As for those of you who have watched my recent GTA 3 video will know, one of my main problems with this game's story is how it feels like everything that happens in between Catalina's betrayal and Claude's revenge just happens to connect the two events to each other. While Catalina's work with the Colombian cartel behind the scenes continually impacts the criminal underworld and therefore Claude, it doesn't ever feel like our protagonist is actively pursuing his revenge, but rather that the jobs that he performs for the various gangs throughout the city just happen to combat Catalina's plans. Because of that, I don't feel that I can put Catalina any higher than the number 9 spot on this list of the greatest GTA villains of all time. Do you agree with me? Do you also think that Catalina deserves the spot? Or do you think she should be ranked higher or lower? Leave a comment down below telling me what you think. And if you're enjoying this series so far, feel free to leave a like on this video and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so that you'll be notified this Wednesday when I return with the number 8 entry for this list. But until then, have a blessed few days, and I'll see you all in the next one. This is your boy Doug6, and I'm signing off. Hello everybody, and welcome back to DT December, a series in which I'll be counting down my top 12 GTA villains of all time. If you want more info on this whole thing, feel free to check out my first video in this series where I explain the rules of my list. Or if you haven't seen my previous DT December videos and want to avoid spoilers, check out this playlist to watch every prior entry up to this point. Today, I'll be talking about my number 8 entry into this list, Lance Vance from Vice City. I said a few episodes ago that we'd get to him, and now it's finally time to talk about the last dance of Lance Vance. Similar to a previous entry, Billy Gray, Lance is introduced to us as an ally near the beginning of the game, though he starts off being much more enigmatic than any other character I've talked about so far, given his strange ability to appear when Tommy needs him most, and then disappear right afterwards without a trace. We first meet Lance while following a lead on who ambushed the drug deal at the start of the game. He reveals that he's also interested in learning who attacked Tommy because Lance's brother Vic was the seller who was killed during the deal. Lance then briefly shows Tommy around town, specifically where he can get strapped, before parting ways for now with our protagonist. The next time we see Lance, he magically appears once again to help Tommy oversee a drug deal for Ricardo Diaz, who they would soon learn was behind the ambush at the start of the game. Through the next couple of missions involving Lance, we start to see his cool and calm demeanor he started off with shift into a more impulsive and reckless attitude as his desire to avenge his brother nearly cost him his life. By going against Tommy's plans and jumping the gun, the two are forced to work together to infiltrate Diaz's mansion before eliminating the drug lord once and for all. And with Diaz usurped, the two inherit his empire as business partners. From here on though, Lance's attitude starts to turn more and more sour as he grows paranoid of and feels belittled by Tommy, citing that his brother used to treat him like a kid and that he feels we've done the same by doing things like embarrassing him in front of the gang. Despite Tommy's best efforts to calm him, Lance's impulses take over once again as he stabs our protagonist in the back by siding with Sonny Forelli in the final mission. This leads to his subsequent death at the hands of Tommy Vercetti, and while it's hard to argue that he didn't get what he deserved, his death is still one that makes me sad to think about because of how much I liked his character. While Lance may not have been a strong villain by any means, mostly due to the fact that he only was a villain for approximately 2 minutes, his journey to becoming an antagonist is what really evokes emotion out of me because he's not a character I want to have to hate. Much like another character I'm sure we all know I'm going to talk about later in this series, Lance starts off as such a cool and likable guy, and when he reaches his boiling point and switches allegiances, it's a real gut punch, especially when you factor in just how much more personality he got to show in the prequeling Vice City stories. I mean, just look at how he dances around with the exaggerated swagger of a black 80s man. It just gives me goosebumps every time. Regardless, if Lance had more time to shine as a villain, I'm sure I'd be able to rank him higher, but thanks to the charisma he showcased while he was an ally that left me with dread after he turned into an enemy that needed to be put down, he'll safely earn the number 8 spot on my list of the greatest GTA villains of all time. But do you agree with this placement, or do you perhaps believe that Lance Vance should be ranked higher or lower? Please let me know what you think down in the comments. And if you're enjoying this series so far, feel free to leave a like on this video and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so that you'll be notified this Friday when I return with the number 7 entry for this list. But until then, have a blessed day or two, and I will see you guys in a few days. This is your boy Doug the Duck 6, and I am signing off. Hello everybody, and welcome back to DT December, a series in which I'll be counting down my top 12 GTA villains of all time. If you want more info on this whole thing, feel free to check out my first video in this series where I explain the rules of my list. Or if you haven't seen my previous DT December videos and want to avoid spoilers, check out this playlist to watch every prior entry up to this point. Today, I'll be talking about my number 7 entry into this list, Devin Weston from Grand Theft Auto 5. We're first introduced to Weston in the infamous mission By the Book, as a rich, cashmere sweater-wearing friend of Steve Haynes, who has already been presented as quite the scumbag by this point. So by immediately associating him with a character like this, we're given the impression that Weston must have some similar traits to him. Thus Trevor, one of our protagonists, treats him as such. In our next encounter with him, one of our other protagonists, Michael, shows him a similar lack of respect until the billionaire offers to use his connections to grant him anything he desires, which ends up being a meeting with the legendary movie producer Solomon Richards, in exchange for our protagonist's work in acquiring several high-end cars for him. With this offer on the table, Michael's opinion on him completely switches up as he even tries to convince Franklin that working for him could be a promising opportunity. Despite Michael's newly found positive views on him, Weston continually speaks condescendingly to our protagonistic trio, being sure to mock them for how poor they are compared to him. Our main chain of missions involving Weston revolves around those expensive cars he has our protagonists boost for him, and while there's a clear tension between him and Trevor, he's able to maintain a positive relationship with Michael thanks to their deal regarding Solomon Richards. And even though Franklin clearly dislikes him, Weston starts to show the youngest criminal a level of respect the more they interact, and goes as far as to advise him against letting Trevor and Michael hold him back. Eventually, the minor arc surrounding the expensive cars reaches its resolution when we successfully transport them. However, remaining true to his dickhead form, he withholds the protagonist's payment upon completion of the deal, having his assistant spout some corporate bullshit to try and trick Franklin into thinking that they have our best interests in mind. When Michael hears about this, he buys into the bullshit and sides with Weston since the two still have their deal regarding Solomon Richards. Or at least, that is until Weston pulls out of that deal by trying to pull the plug on the movie Solomon had been working on. Now that our protagonists have served their purpose by getting him the cars, Weston's interests in keeping Michael happy have waned, so he moves forward with his plan to shut down the movie studio to cash in on an insurance policy, and this involves destroying the movie that Michael had been credited as an executive producer on. Of course, we don't take this lying down and we recover the movie, which leads to the death of Weston's assistant. At this point, the gloves are finally off, and Weston officially becomes one of the story's villains as he uses his authority as a major shareholder in Merryweather Security to try and have Michael's family killed in retaliation. When this attempt is thwarted, Weston goes to our only protagonist he somewhat respects and orders him to either kill Michael or face the consequences. For the sake of simplicity, I'm mostly going to ignore GTA 5's A and B endings and only consider ending C, since that's the canon ending. So with that in mind, let's talk about what happens next. Following the heist of the Union Depository's gold surplus, Lester leaks that the crew are melting it down at a foundry, prompting Weston to send Merryweather to take the bullion for himself. Noose also arrives on Steve Haynes' behalf, but that's not relevant right now. Then, once our opposition is dealt with, our protagonists move on to eliminate several major enemies they've made throughout the story, the final of which being Devin Weston himself. After powering through his security team, Trevor eventually captures Weston, transports him out to a cliff, and then our three unified protagonists put an end to the billionaire who'd ripped them off and threatened their lives. Even though Weston isn't introduced until we're a good portion into the story, GTA 5 is a long enough game to where his lack of involvement at the very start of it doesn't really detriment his effectiveness as a villain, because he's still given so much time after his first appearance to make an impact. He also has an interesting trajectory as a character given his roller coaster-like relationship he has with our main cast, despite remaining such a static character. When we first get involved with Weston, he just poses as a typical asshole with deep pockets who will have to work for. But while Trevor and Michael see right through him, Michael is fooled into believing his lies because of the promise he's already fulfilled by hooking us up with one of Michael's idols. Simultaneously, while Weston has no interest in winning over Trevor, probably because he knows he can't, he tries to get into Franklin's head by convincing him that the other two protagonists are going to hold him back from reaching his full potential. Weston certainly sees use in Franklin greater than just boosting some high-end cars for himself, so he he tries to show him enough respect to gain his loyalty, and in the universe where Franklin kills Michael, it apparently works to some degree. But unfortunately for Weston, in this reality, Franklin sticks to his guns, and after Weston shows Michael his true colors, all three of our protagonists ultimately put this villain to rest. While Devin Weston himself may be a physically weak antagonist considering how easily he goes down once his forces are dealt with, his position of power renders him a force to be reckoned with, and so far, he's the only villain I've talked about who actually gets the chance to win, depending on the player's choice. Still though, as powerful as Weston proves to be in the story of Grand Theft Auto 5, he'll only earn the number 7 spot on the list of greatest GTA villains of all time, if nothing else because there's simply 6 characters who fulfilled the villainous role better than he could. But what do you guys think? Do you believe Weston deserves the ranking I gave him, or do you think he should be placed higher or lower? Tell me in the comments section, and if you're enjoying this series so far, feel free to leave a like on this video, and subscribe if you haven't done so already so that you'll be notified this Sunday when I return with the number 6 entry for this list. Have a blessed couple of days until then, and I'll see you all soon. This is your boy Doug the Dog 6, and I am signing off. Hello everybody, and welcome back to DT December, a series in which I'll be counting down my top 12 GTA villains of all time. If you want more info on this whole thing, feel free to check out my first video in this series where I explain the rules of my list. Or if you haven't seen my previous DT December videos and want to avoid spoilers, check out this playlist to watch every prior entry up to this point. Today, I'll be talking about my number 6 entry into this list, Dmitry Raskolov from Grand Theft Auto 4. Now that we're officially in the top half of this list, it's time to begin talking about the most dangerous and imposing villains in Grand Theft Auto history. And who better to start off with than GTA 4's Dmitry Raskolov. We first meet the man after our protagonist Nico kills his cousin's loan shark Vlad, resulting in the pair of cousins captured by Vlad's employers. When we wake up, Nico comes face to face with Dmitry as we're interrogated by him and an associate. Shortly afterwards, the boss of the whole operation, Mikhail Faustin, comes downstairs and escalates the situation by shooting his employee, and then shoots Roman for good measure when our cousin doesn't stop screaming for help. In this cutscene, we're immediately shown how impulsive and irrational Mikhail is, and by comparison, Dmitry comes off as calm and compassionate, and this all becomes especially true over the course of the next few missions. Towards the end of this chapter of the story, Mikhail orders Nico to kill the son of the rival Petrovic Mafia's leader, which results in their more powerful adversary threatening war with the Faustin Mafia. Dmitry manages to cut a deal with them, however, but this means that Nico will have to kill Mikhail for the rest of the family to be absolved of their leader's sins. After Mikhail's death, Dmitry asks Nico to come alone to an undisclosed warehouse to receive his payment, and when we arrive, Dmitry reveals his true colors to Nico as he offers him up to Ray Bulgarin, a man Nico had worked for back in Europe who wants him dead, in order to tie up the last remaining loose end of the old Faustin Mafia while simultaneously forming an alliance with Bulgarin's Mafia. After we escape, Nico calls Roman to inform him of the situation, and the two agree to pack up their things and flee Hove Beach. As they return to their apartment, however, they find it burning to the ground, and they find the same when they head over to Roman's cab depot. With nowhere else to go, the cousins go on the retreat to Bohan after being exiled from Broker, after which Dmitry spins his betrayal as a result of Nico's actions, and threatens that he will find the cousins and put an end to them. At this point, Dmitry feels like an absolute menace of a villain whose power our protagonist should genuinely fear. And if he had remained like this through the course of the rest of the game, he easily would have ranked much higher on this list. However, apart from the occasional phone call or mention of his name to remind us that he exists in the city, we don't come into contact with Dmitry again until the very end of the game. Granted, in the meantime, Dmitry is clearly working behind the scenes to transform the former Faustin Mafia that was local to Broker into a force that threatens to uproot all of Liberty City, and this new Raskolov Mafia is enough of a threat that one of the 5 families and the IAA have to enlist Nico to suppress their influence. But Dmitry himself remains absent from our screens until either the last or second to last mission of the game, depending on the player's choice. If we choose the deal ending and opt to work for Dmitry again, he's quick to show us exactly why that was the wrong move as he double crosses the buyers on his end of town, forcing us to do the same thing before the buyers grow wise and try to kill us. But once the deal is done and over with, Nico officially gets out of the game to settle down as a civilian, only for Dmitry to send an assassin to kill him, who fails and ends up killing Roman instead. Enraged by the loss of his cousin, Nico tracks Dmitry down and fights through his men to catch him in the act of betraying Jimmy Pecorino, the mob boss they had both worked for during the deal, proving yet again how psychotic and impulsive he truly is, which is ironic considering that's how his original business partner was portrayed back at the start of the game. Nonetheless, after we fight through some more of Dmitry's men, we chase him down to Happiness Island where we shoot him to the brink of death and then watch him bleed out to end the game. In the revenge ending, meanwhile, Nico finds out about Dmitry's whereabouts and decides to pay him a visit on the same boat that originally brought our protagonist to Liberty City in the first place. After a long shootout into the cargo hold, Nico finds Dimitri, who remains as cocky as ever as he throws more men at our protagonist in an effort to stop us. But when we fight through them and confront our antagonist, he begins to cower and beg for his life, making it all the more satisfying when Nico finally puts that bullet through his skull. After this, the story continues on despite the main antagonist already being defeated, and we see Jimmy Pecorino take revenge on Nico for not doing the deal, which leads us into the final mission where we kill Pecorino in place of Dimitri. And because of this, I think Dimitri comes off as a weaker villain in this ending overall, since the story doesn't end at his defeat. In the end, I think Dimitri's status as a villain is diminished by his absence throughout most of the story, and at least in the revenge ending, he's made to feel insignificant since he doesn't even make it to the game's finale. Because of this, as memorable of a character as he is, I don't feel that I can rank him above the other villains I'm going to talk about. However, because of how impactful his actions are to our protagonist when he is on screen, as well as how much of a threat he and his forces become to the city and even the country in the grand scheme, I feel he easily ranks higher than all the other antagonists I've talked about thus far. For those reasons, I give Dmitri Raskolov the number 6 spot on this list of the greatest GTA villains of all time. But what are your thoughts? Do you agree with Dimitri's placement on this list, or do you think he should have been ranked elsewhere? And now that we're halfway through the series, how are you enjoying DT December so far? Tell me down below, and if you have enjoyed the series so far, feel free to leave a like on this video and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so that you'll be notified this Tuesday when I return with the number 5 entry for this list. So until then, have a blessed couple of days, and I'll see you all again real soon. This is your boy Doug the Dog 6, and I'm signing off. Hello everybody, and welcome back to DT December, a series in which I'll be counting down my top 12 GTA villains of all time. If you want more info on this whole thing, feel free to check out my first video in this series where I explain the rules of my list. Or if you haven't seen my previous DT December videos and want to avoid spoilers, check out this playlist to watch every prior entry up to this point. Today, I'll be talking about my number 5 entry into this list, Big Smoke from San Andreas. We first meet the Fat Man after CJ makes his return to his home on Grove Street following a 5-year hiatus. As our protagonist endures some flashbacks while the reality of his mother's death truly sets in, he's suddenly interrupted by Big Smoke.
You picked the wrong house, fool!
Once our old friend recognizes us, he pulls CJ into a hug and goes with him to his mother's funeral, where we meet up with the rest of the old gang at Ryder and Sweet, and have to escape some attacking ballers with them on bikes as we make it back to the Grove. Throughout the first arc of this game, CJ works with Smoke, Ryder, and Sweet to help restore the honor he lost for abandoning his family, as well as rebuild our gang into the force it once was. Along the way, we see the four get along like childhood friends while they're all together, and we see each of our homies show CJ love whenever it's just the two of them. In this arc, we feel a real sense of brotherhood between this quartet of iconic characters, as if nothing could ever tear them apart, and that together, they're going to rise as the kings of Los Santos with their army of Grove Street families. That is until the betrayal. Let me tell you, when I first witnessed this reveal, my jaw dropped, and to be quite honest, I've had trust issues ever since. How could Big Smoke, our homie, our dog, the funny fat man who ordered 2 number 9s, how could he of all people do this to CJ? By working with Tenpenny and associating himself with the motherfucking Green Saber, Smoke bears responsibility for CJ's mother's death. And after this bomb is dropped, we don't even have time to process it because we have to go across town immediately and rescue Sweet now that CJ's realized his brother has walked into a trap. Following CJ's subsequent exile, Big Smoke becomes absent from our screens until the end of the game, but unlike with our last entry, Dimitri, Smoke's absence makes a lot more narrative sense since he would assume that at this point, CJ and the Grove have been defeated, so there's no reason to travel across the state to finish him off. However, much like many of the other villains I've talked about so far, his absence ultimately hurts him because, while vengeance is on the minds of our protagonist and his allies until the end of San Fierro, by the time we get to Las Venturas, Smoke has pretty much become an afterthought. CJ's new focus seems to be solely on building up his family's business ventures around the state, as well as getting Sweet out of prison. And even when he finally makes his return to Los Santos, he shows he has no interest in combating Smoke, as his only real concern is managing Mad Dog. It's only when we finally earn Sweet's release that our brother reminds CJ of the importance of getting revenge on Smoke and avenging their mother. Once Big Smoke re-enters CJ's crosshairs, the Johnson brothers begin to work tirelessly to uncover his whereabouts so that they may take him down once and for all. After he's been tracked down, CJ busts into his crack fortress and begins a climactic shootout with all of Smoke's forces, taking on members of the Ballas, the Vagos, and the Rifas, who we've spent the whole game fighting individually, but here they're all a united army under Big Smoke. After clearing floor after floor of these gangsters, we eventually reach the man himself to have one last confrontation with him where he explains why he did what he did. And while we've always known Smoke to be a big, lovable, and lighthearted friend, this is the first time we hear him speak to us in such a cold and aggressive way, now that he doesn't have to put on an act any longer. Following a subsequent boss fight against Smoke and more of his men, we eventually bring him to the brink of death to have one last dialogue with him. He explains that he was caught up up in the money and the power. And even though he was responsible for CJ's mother's death, you can still feel the pain in our protagonist's eyes as he watches the life drain from the friend he once loved. Big Smoke may not be the main villain of San Andreas, but he was still a damn impactful one. He may not be on screen for a horribly long amount of time, but whenever he is, he almost always steals the show in his own charming way. Because of his comedic antics and the love he always showed his homies, it made it incredibly heartbreaking to witness his betrayal. And even though he's undeniably evil for involving himself in the death of two of his best friends' mother en route to building his empire, I still can't help but wish things didn't have to be this way whenever I have to put him down at the end of the game. Most of the other antagonists I've talked about so far aren't like this. When you kill someone like Sonny Forelli, Devin Weston, or Dmitry Raskolov, you feel good knowing you finally put away the man who's given your protagonist so much torment. But when you kill Big Smoke, you feel like you've just had to kill your best friend. While he may be hindered a bit by a lack of exposure throughout most of the game, the way his actions impact the life of our protagonist and his allies, and the emotional impact he leaves on the player are what earn him the number 5 spot on the list of greatest GTA villains of all time. But what do you think? Do you think he should have a higher or lower place on this list, or did I get his spot right? And what do you think of DT December so far as well? Please let me know your opinions down below. And if you've enjoyed this series so far, feel free to leave a like on this video, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so that you'll be notified this Thursday when I return with the number 4 entry for this list. Until then, I hope you have a blessed few days, and I'll see you all then. This is your boy Dog6, and I am signing off. Hello everybody, and welcome back to DT December, a series in which I'll be counting down my top 12 GTA villains of all time. If you want more info on this whole thing, feel free to check out my first video in this series where I explain the rules of my list. Or if you haven't seen my previous DT December videos and want to avoid spoilers, check out this playlist to watch every prior entry up to this point. Today, I'll be talking about my number 4 entry into this list, the Mendez brothers from Vice City Stories. Yes, I'm counting both Diego and Armando together because, while they may have differing personalities, they both represent the same force that antagonizes Vic Vance throughout most of the story. The first time we hear about these two is right after the mission From Zero to Hero, where we steal a large shipment of cocaine from Vic's former commanding officer, Jerry Martinez, when our protagonist calls him to brag about the heist, only for Martinez to tell us that the drugs belong to Vice City's most powerful kingpins, the Mendezes. Now that we've made an enemy out of them, they begin to retaliate by trying to crush our businesses. But once they see how formidable the Vances are by fending off their forces, they invite Vic and Lance to meet them at their mansion to give us the chance to work for them if we can prove that Martinez was the one who screwed them. And after we successfully frame him, our partnership with the Mendezes begins. Over the next portion of the game, we perform several missions at the orders of the Mendezes, and through these missions, we start to learn more distinguishing features about each of their personalities. Most notably, Armando is quite charismatic and composed compared to his quieter, more introverted brother. Additionally, Diego seems to be only capable of speaking Spanish, which is all the more reason to leave the speaking to Armando, as Diego is completely unwilling to converse with either Vance brother. But while Armando may speak to Vic with a collected demeanor as he feigns compassion and understanding, it's important to remember that these brothers are in their position for a reason, and it's because of how ruthless they aren't afraid to be when necessary. Whether it's by employing Vic to exterminate a startup drug enterprise in the city, or by throwing the Vances under the bus if we're unable to recover some of their cocaine from the police, the Mendezes repeatedly show that they will do whatever it takes to get their way and stay on top. After some time of working for them, the Mendezes decide that we've made back the money we owed them, and so they relinquish us of our indentured servitude. However, they also demand that upon our release from our debts, we also hand over all of the Vance crime family's assets and leave town, and in exchange, Vic, Lance, and their family will be unharmed. Of course, the Vances aren't willing to just give up their entire business, so the ruthless Mendezes escalate our summit into an execution, which the Vance brothers narrowly escape. But though our protagonist may have survived this encounter, this betrayal means we're officially at war with the Mendez cartel. Just like before when we originally robbed them, the Mendezes go after several of our businesses, forcing Vic and Lance to form a militia out of the allies we've made throughout the story to fend off our more powerful adversary. Once our businesses are locked down, we then go on the offensive by infiltrating the Mendezes' mansion and destroying the brothers' bearer bonds. In retaliation, Armando has Louise, Vic's love interest, captured and threatens to kill her if the Vances don't flee the city, resulting in Vic and Lance racing across town to rescue her. Lance, being Lance of course, tries to do things his way and is subsequently captured as well, leaving just our protagonist to march through the Mendezes' men in order to save them. We're ultimately confronted by Armando, who claims that Lance and Louise are already dead, and as he reveals a flamethrower, he threatens that Vic will be joining them very soon. A rather unique boss fight against him ensues, and after we kill him, Vic rushes upstairs to find Lance and Louise as the latter of which bleeds out. With the love of his life gone and the Mendez cartel at fault, Vic no longer cares about business. He no longer cares about anybody's drug empires. All he wants to do is take revenge on the men who have cost him everything, starting with Diego Mendez. So after stealing an attack helicopter from his old military base, Vic flies to Diego's last known location and attacks the building with the chopper until he's shot down, at which point he lands and storms each floor until he finds Diego. We then chase him back up to the rooftop, where we're met by our other antagonist, Jerry Martinez. And as Diego re-emerges, all three men engage in a final battle from which Vic ultimately emerges victorious. Now that Martinez and the Mendez brothers are history, Lance arrives for one last dialogue before our pair of brothers fly off into the sunset, concluding the 3D era on a high note. But as much of a feel-good moment as it was to see our protagonist prevail over his enemies, we have to remember what his enemies spent the whole game putting him through. Though they don't appear until we make it through a good chunk of the story, the Mendezes do a great job at representing the final obstacle that Vic and Lance are going to have to overcome in order to live relatively safe and comfortable lives in Vice City. Throughout the first half of the game, we encounter plenty of antagonists who we either overcome or force onto the retreat as our protagonist becomes progressively more powerful, be it Marty J. Williams, Brian Forbes, or Jerry Martinez. As Vic's empire starts to grow, he becomes more capable of eliminating these threats and even becomes comfortable enough to challenge Martinez. However, when we run into the Mendezes, it appears that we finally met our match, as these brothers make it clear that they're not men to be fucked with. And so, our protagonist wisely doesn't try to fuck with them until he's forced to. However, while most of the other villains I've talked about like Massimo Torrini, Catalina, and Devin Weston don't leave any real lasting impact on our protagonist after they're dead and gone, the war with the Mendez cartel costs Vic the woman he loves. And after watching Louise die right in front of Vic, I personally couldn't wait to get my hands on Diego Mendez and put an end to that fucking bastard for what he and his brother had done. It's not often that a video game can evoke emotion out of me, but Vice City Stories did just that by making the Mendez brothers as despicable villains as they are. So for those reasons, they'll earn the number 4 spot on my list of the top 12 GTA villains of all time. But what do you think? Do you agree that they've earned that rank, or do you feel that they should have been placed higher or lower on this list? And how are you liking DT December so far? Let me know in the comments, and if you've enjoyed this series so far, feel free to leave a like on this video and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so that you'll be notified this Saturday when I return with the number 3 entry for this list. We're in the end game now, lads, but until then, I hope you each have a blessed few days, and I'll see you all soon. This is your boy Doug the Dog 6, and I am signing off. Hello everybody, and welcome back to DT December, a series in which I'll be counting down my top 12 GTA villains of all time. If you want more info on this whole thing, feel free to check out my first video in this series where I explain the rules of my list. Or if you haven't seen my previous DT December videos and want to avoid spoilers, check out this playlist to watch every prior entry up to this point. Today, I'll be talking about my number 3 entry into this list, Steve Haynes from Grand Theft Auto 5. Haynes first becomes known a while after the Evangelico jewel store heist near the start of the game, when the FIB agent pieces together the connections between Michael Townley and Michael Santa. When he realizes what opportunity he has on his hands, he puts Michael to work by forcing him and our other protagonists to do his dirty work in order to benefit the FIB and hinder the IAA. In our first encounter with the man, we can immediately get this douchebag jock vibe off of him as he tries to laugh off Michael's sarcastic insults. But once he has enough, the mask slips off and we see him use his power to take control of the situation. Per Haynes' orders, Michael, Franklin, and Trevor are forced to capture a suspected terrorist from the IAA so that the FIB can interrogate him and take credit for preventing a terrorist attack. After this, we're occasionally contacted by Haynes to complete near Herculean tasks with minimal resources, and our protagonists are forced to do his bidding because of the dirt he has on them. It doesn't matter if they're broke and in exile, or living well in the Vinewood Hills. If Haynes needs something done, our protagonists will do it for him, because if they don't, then they'll be locked away for life for their crimes. He also seems to be unwilling to compromise in most cases, as he shows how little care he has for Michael's personal life when our protagonist finally has an opportunity to make his return to Los Santos, and Haynes forces him to join the crew in Blaine County to raid Humane Labs anyway. At the same time, however, when he forgets to tell our protagonist that they need a large crew for said raid, he shows little reluctance in getting his own hands dirty by joining us out in the field. So as much of an asshole as he's proven to be so far in the story, it's hard to have zero respect for him after this. Of course though, because he's been so heavily involved in government corruption in order to achieve his goals against the IAA, it all starts to catch up with him as an investigation into him begins to be conducted, meaning he needs us to raid the FIB and delete the evidence they have against him. Michael agrees to do this under the conditions that his own files are deleted interested as well, and that Haynes considers them square if we do this for him, after which we do the job. But he wouldn't be a villain if he lived up to his word, now would he? Sure enough, Haynes tries to arrest Michael, but in the middle of our showdown, the IAA, Noose, and Merryweather all show up and interrupt the proceedings, leading to an all-out war between each faction while Haynes makes his escape. Now that he's been made an enemy, Haynes cuts ties with our protagonists, or at least he does for the most part. While this is the last time he sees Michael or Trevor, Haynes eventually meets up with Franklin to coerce him into killing Trevor, which leads into the choice we have to make at the end of the game. Now, just like I did when I talked about Devin Weston, I'm mostly going to ignore ending A and primarily talk about the canon ending C, where Haynes meets his end. After the shootout against Noose and Merryweather, our protagonists create their list of targets to eliminate, and as they know how dangerous it would be to leave Haynes alive, they have Lester track him down and Trevor kills him. When I think of villains in Grand Theft Auto, it's hard for me to not think of Steve Haynes for a variety of reasons. Unlike many of the characters I've already talked about on this list, Haynes is an antagonist who doesn't suffer from a lack of screen time because he's pretty much present throughout the majority of the story, and he's shown throughout the story that no matter where our protagonists go, they're not safe from his reach. Additionally, unlike most of the other villains who have to keep their distance from our protagonist, since that distance is the only thing stopping us from killing him, Haynes isn't afraid to get up close and personal with Michael, Trevor, or Franklin, because the files he has on them gives him immunity from their wrath. That is until those files are deleted during the FIB raid. Lastly, while he may not have been as threatening to one individual character like Devin Weston was to Michael, Haynes' government position gives him a fearful amount of leverage over all three of our protagonists, as he could easily have any of them put away the second they outlive their usefulness to him, as is exhibited in the wrap-up, which I personally believe makes him more threatening overall than the other main antagonists of this game. Because of those reasons, Steve Haynes is going to earn the number 3 spot on this list of the greatest GTA villains of all time. What do you guys think though? Do you think Haynes should have a higher or lower spot on this list, or do you agree with his placements? And how are you liking DT December so far? Be sure to tell me in the comments down below. And if you've enjoyed the series so far, feel free to leave a like on this video, and subscribe if you haven't done so already so that you'll be notified this Monday when I return with the number 2 entry for this list. Have a blessed couple of days until then, and I'll see you all very soon. This is your boy Doug the Dog 6, and I'm signing off. Hello everybody, and welcome back to DT December, a series in which I'll be counting down my top 12 GTA villains of all time. If you want more info on this whole thing, feel free to check out my first video in this series where I explain the rules of my list. Or if you haven't seen my previous DT December videos and want to avoid spoilers, check out this playlist to watch every prior entry up to this point. Today, I'll be talking about my number 2 entry into this list, Jerry Martinez from Vice City Stories. We're introduced to Martinez in the opening cutscene of the game, and despite being our sergeant, he appears to be rather laid back and maybe a bit disrespectful. And while he puts on this nice guy facade as he gets to know our protagonist a little bit and gives him some advice on how to solve his problems, something about him feels a bit shady. Regardless, he asks us to do him a favor and pick up a package, and Vic reluctantly agrees to do it. Then on the way back to the base, Martinez asks us to hold on to the package we retrieved for him in our barracks, which our protagonist is still reluctant to do, but against his better judgment, he follows his sergeant's orders and stashes the drugs. In the next mission, Martinez convinces our skeptical protagonist to do him another favor, using the idea of earning money to help his sick brother against him. Then in our third mission for him, he asks us to bring him a prostitute, after which Vic flat out tells him that he doesn't trust him, at which Martinez initially appears offended, only to go back to his usual laid-back dickhead self immediately after. Regardless of this, we do as he asks and we bring the hooker back to the base, only to be confronted by another sergeant over the drugs he found under Vic's bed. When he realizes that we're with a prostitute as well, the sergeant kicks us out of the army, and it's all thanks to Martinez. While working for Martinez though, we meet Phil Cassidy, and after we're dishonorably discharged, Phil sets us up with a place to stay and offers us some work to help us get back on our feet. But the only problem is Phil works for Martinez, so in order to get by, Vic is essentially still stuck working for the man who got him kicked out of the army, and I'm sure we can all guess how well that goes. Before the inevitable happens though, we get the chance to see another side of Martinez's character in his first interaction with Vic since we became a civilian. While in our prior encounters with him, Martinez came off as a doofus degenerate. When Vic begins to threaten him, he suddenly becomes serious as he explains his reasoning for throwing us under the bus. Additionally, as if his actions weren't already bad enough, he pulls no punches in this interaction as he makes sure to mock Vic's sick brother. Meanwhile, in our next mission for Phil, we witness the tension between him and Martinez play out after he apparently told our antagonist that he didn't trust him. Sound familiar? Well, just like he did with Vic, Martinez immediately betrays Phil after the show of distrust, and he tries to have us both killed. After we survive the betrayal, Martinez threatens Vic to leave town before he kills us, and this is the last that we hear from him for a while. As we remain off of Martinez's radar, Vic gets to work at building up his crime family and is soon joined by his brother Lance, who tells him about a large shipment of cocaine that they can steal. At first, Vic is against the idea of taking the shipment since he's been very adamant up until this point in the story that he has no desire to work with drugs. But when Lance tells him that the coke belongs to Jerry Martinez, Vic reconsiders things and ultimately decides to steal the drugs to get back at his former commanding officer. He realizes immediately afterwards, however, that he should have stuck to his principles when he calls Martinez to brag about screwing him over, only for our former sergeant to inform us that the drugs belong to the most powerful drug empire in Vice City, the Mendez cartel, and that both he and Vic are now fucked. However, Martinez has a backup plan to rat on everybody and live a new life in Witness protection, which leads to his physical exit for the next portion of the game. But even while he's off screen, Martinez's presence is still very much felt. Towards the end of the game, our antagonist sends his men to kidnap Vic's love interest, Louise, and almost had her killed before we show up and bring her to the hospital to save her life. Then several missions later, when she's about to get out of the hospital, Martinez threatens to go pay her a visit, forcing Vic to rush over there to save her again while Lance takes care of a deal. However, it turns out this is all just a ploy to separate the Vance brothers, and it nearly results in Lance's death until we arrive just in time to rescue him. While Martinez is unsuccessful in eliminating Vic's allies, it's around this time that Louise is killed by the Mendezes, which leads us into our finale. As Vic goes on his rampage through Diego Mendez's hideout, Martinez catches wind of the action and makes his arrival to put an end to both of the parties that have caused him so much trouble. Eventually, Vic chases Diego up to the rooftop, only to be stopped and held at gunpoint by Martinez, who takes the opportunity to taunt and mock us one last time before killing us. However, our encounter with him is interrupted when Diego Mendez makes his presence known, resulting in a final showdown between the three in which we kill both of our antagonists once and for all. Grand Theft Auto Vice City Stories is a game with a criminally underrated story, as it gave us not one, not two, but three of the greatest villains in GTA history. But while the Mendez brothers posed a great threat to our protagonists in their own right, I think Jerry Martinez ultimately takes the cake over them as the superior villain for a variety of reasons. While the Mendezes are undoubtedly the more powerful party out of the two, which is evident based on Martinez's fear of them earlier in the story, Jerry's strength comes from his ability to counter nearly any situation he finds himself in and leverage a way out. In other words, Jerry knows how to survive. When his place in the military was jeopardized at the start of the game, he had already pinned the evidence onto Vic and got himself out of trouble. And when Vic was put into hot water with the Mendezes, he found himself an out and took it by turning states. Additionally, while he was ultimately unsuccessful, Martinez showed off a bit more of his strategic side when he attempted to kill Lance by separating him from our protagonist. He may not have the brute force the Mendezes do, but as long as he's alive, he is undoubtedly a danger to all of his enemies and their families. Lastly, when all else failed, Martinez showed until the very end that he wasn't afraid of Vic and truly believed he could beat him. Whereas Diego Mendez was caught running away from Vic, Martinez actively flew to where he knew Vic was to try and finish him off, which, in spite of his despicability, you've got to respect his balls. For all of those reasons, Sergeant Jerry Martinez will earn the number 2 spot on this list of the greatest GTA villains of all time. But do you agree? Do you think he should have this spot, or do you feel that he should have been ranked higher or lower? And what do you think of DT December so far? Let me know down below, and if you've enjoyed the series so far, then feel free to leave a like on this video, and subscribe if you haven't done so already so that you'll be notified on Christmas when I return with the number 1 entry for this list. Until then, have a blessed couple of days, and I'll see you one last time very soon. This is your boy Doug the Dog 6, and I am signing off. Hello everybody, and welcome to the final episode of DT December, a series in which I've counted down my top 12 GTA villains of all time. If you want more info on this whole thing, feel free to check out my first video in this series where I explain the rules of my list. Or if you haven't seen my previous DT December videos and want to avoid spoilers, check out this playlist to watch the first 11 entries. Today, I'll be talking about the number 1 villain in all of Grand Theft Auto, Frank Tenpenny from San Andreas. Let's be real, I think we all knew who my number 1 pick was going to be since the first episode of the series. But who can really blame me for it? Tenpenny's such an iconic character that I don't even think I really need to explain why I think he's the greatest GTA villain of all time. But still, I'm gonna go ahead and take the time to give him his flowers anyway. San Andreas wastes no time in introducing us to Officer Tenpenny as he and his posse are shown detaining our protagonist CJ in one of the game's opening cutscenes. In addition to taking our cash under the guise of it being drug money, Tenpenny and his crew plant evidence on CJ to pin the murder of a cop they just killed onto us, and imply that we'll be framed for this murder if we don't play ball. With that, they drop us off in ballless territory to let us fend for ourselves as we try to make it back home. After this, Tenpenny's next appearances are at the houses of Big Smoke and Ryder to occasionally give them info on events taking place so that the Grove can get the drop and get ahead. Or at least, that's what we assume he's doing at the time. He makes it clear later on that the reason he does this is that all of Los Santos' gangs remain on somewhat of an even playing field, and that none of them get too big for their britches. But nonetheless, every time he's on screen, he always remains disrespectful to the members of Grove Street, particularly CJ, to remind us that he's untouchable. As CJ and Sweet, meanwhile, start to build Grove Street back into the force it once was, it can be implied that Big Smoke and Ryder leak our plans to crash, as the shootout Sweet plans to lead Grove Street into against the Ballas turns out to be an ambush. And given Tenpenny's philosophy on keeping the gangs level with each other, it wouldn't surprise me if he realized Grove Street was becoming too powerful and decided to cut its legs in the Green Saber. But speaking of this infamous mission, we simply cannot talk about this climax in the story without talking about the big reveal that Big Smoke and Ryder had been working with Tenpenny. By this point of the story, it's been made abundantly clear that this corrupt cop is a completely irredeemable evil who we'll have to bring down at some point. But to see Smoke and Ryder make a deal with this devil after everything CJ had been through with them, it's truly heartbreaking, and if two of our best friends can be corrupted by this bastard, then it's just all the more evident that he'll have to go down before he destroys everything we know and love. Unfortunately though, by this point, it feels like it's too late to stop him, because in the fallout of the Green Saber, it's revealed that Sweet is in prison, it's fair to assume that Grove Street has fallen, and now we're stranded in the middle of nowhere. Couple that with the aforementioned betrayal of Smoke and Ryder, and I don't think that you could blame CJ if, at this moment, he felt all hope was lost. But regardless of how he feels, Sweet being in prison gives Tenpenny all the more leverage to use against CJ due to his newfound power to make our brother's life hell. And now that he has this leverage, he immediately uses it to force CJ to take out a snitch who has dirt on him. Through most of the rest of the game, CJ is left to his own devices wherever he may be, but no matter where he goes, Tenpenny shows his reach knows no bounds as he frequently travels across the state to force us to do his dirty work. Whether it's petty dealings like forcing us to repay his weed debts to the truth, or more serious matters like taking out those who threaten to expose his corruption, Tenpenny can show up at any time and make CJ drop everything to do his bidding. It's worth pointing out as well that for the majority of the story, Tenpenny usually appears calm and in control of the situation, but when he contacts us in Las Venturas, he's much more on edge because he likely feels the walls are closing in and his time may be up soon. In the mission High Noon, it becomes clear why he's as tense as he is when he turns against Officer Hernandez, the rookie cop of the group, for snitching on him, as somebody with as much information as Hernandez would surely be able to bring Tenpenny down if he's been talking. In this cutscene, he also tasks Officer Pulaski, the other cop in the group, with watching over CJ as we dig our own grave and then killing us afterwards while Tenpenny quite literally fucks off. However, thanks to plot armor, we manage to turn the tables and eliminate Pulaski, leaving Tenpenny all by himself for whatever comes next. As the story continues on, CJ eventually succeeds at getting Sweet out of prison, and while the Johnson brothers are busy rebuilding the Grove into the strongest gang in Los Santos, Tenpenny is arrested and stands trial for his crimes. However, due to a lack of evidence against him, he's found innocent, which results in a mass riot across the city. In the midst of the riot, Sweet and CJ get to work to discover Big Smoke's whereabouts and soon take revenge for his betrayal. And then after Smoke is defeated, Officer Tenpenny makes one last appearance to put us to work one last time before he plans to kill us. Following this final dialogue between the two natural enemies in which Tenpenny tells us his plan to escape the city, he aims a shotgun at us and gets ready to end CJ, only for our protagonist's plot armor to kick in yet again. Foiled by our deadly dolphin dive, Tenpenny retreats and causes an explosion to burn the building down and CJ along with it, forcing us to engage in a shootout against Big Smoke's men, similar to the one we took part in en route to reaching Smoke at the start of the mission, as we now have to escape the building before it explodes. After we make it out, Sweet and CJ chase down Tenpenny's fire truck through the streets of Los Santos while rival gangsters and other cops try to stop us. In the end, our main antagonist loses control of the vehicle and crashes through a bridge, landing in the middle of Grove Street, where he delivers a monologue in which he pretty much states that he doesn't regret a thing, before he bleeds out and poetically meets his end in the center of the hood he tried so hard to destroy. When I think of villains in Grand Theft Auto, Officer Tenpenny is the first one who comes to mind. Sure, that's probably partially due to nostalgia. San Andreas was one of the first video games I've ever played after all, but I think it's mostly due to how effective of a villain he truly was. At the start of the game, before we even take control of our character, he makes his presence and his power known as he wastes no time in showing our protagonist that he owns us. And throughout the game, he makes sure to keep reminding us that if he wants something done, CJ is going to get it done, because if he doesn't, there will be consequences. It doesn't matter how far CJ tries to go either, because he literally chases us all the way around the state to get what he wants. As far as impact goes as well, Tenpenny continually makes life hell for our protagonist, particularly at the start of the game when he takes damn near everything away from us. And even though we're able to take most of it back by the end, our villain's actions while he was alive have left a lasting impact on CJ and the entire Grove that they'll still have to live with. If it weren't for Tenpenny's influence, Ryder and Big Smoke wouldn't have betrayed Grove Street. Well, I won't go as far as to say that Big Smoke wouldn't have, since he's always been in it for himself, but I'd like to at least believe that Ryder would have remained loyal to the Grove if it wasn't for Crash forcing his betrayal. Additionally, Tenpenny's association with the motherfucking Green Saber proves that he at least had some hand in the death of CJ's mom, and no matter how many casinos CJ opens in Las Venturas, no matter how many cars he boosts in San Fierro, and no matter how much territory he conquers in Los Santos, the Johnson family will sadly never have her back. And of course, just as an overall icon, Tenpenny can't be topped by any other character on this list. And as somebody as charismatic as Samuel L. motherfucking Jackson voicing him, it's no wonder why Tenpenny is as memorable as as he is today. From telling Carl that he'll see him around like a donut, to calling CJ a
motherfucking piece of shit gang-banging cocksucker.
He has plenty of quotes that live rent-free in my head to this day. And never mind his comedic tone. Whenever Tenpenny gets serious or aggressive to whichever character he's interacting with, you know he means business. But despite being such a great overall character, he's not a character like Lance Vance or Big Smoke who I feel a bit of sadness for when I kill them. And he's not an annoying pushover like Sonny Forelli or Devin Weston, who are just treated like an obstacle you've overcome when they're gone. No, when this irredeemably evil piece of shit bleeds out on Grove Street, I feel nothing but joy knowing that CJ and the rest of the gang have finally rid themselves of this fuck who has tormented them for years. And now they can finally live their lives without the constant threat of his interference looming over them. And so, for all those reasons, I firmly believe that Officer Frank Tenpenny is the #1 greatest GTA villain of all time. And that is my list. So with everything finally all said and done, what do you guys think? Do you agree with me that Officer Tenpenny is the GOAT of GTA villains? Do you believe somebody else should bear claim to this top spot? Do you agree with my list in general, or do you think I got it wrong? How would you rank your top GTA villains? And by all means, don't feel restricted by a top 12 list. Cap your list off wherever you want. And as for DT December, what did you think? Did you like this whole concept? Do you want to see it return next year? If so, what topic would you like to see me cover? Please leave a comment for me to read your thoughts and opinions down below. If you've enjoyed DT December, then feel free to hit the like button, and then go back to like all the previous episodes as well. And if you'd like to see more GTA content, then feel free to check out some of the other videos I've made, like these ones where I do deep dive retrospectives into a few of the games, or these ones where I analyze characters from some of the games, or this one here where I create an entirely new story around the McCreary crime family before the events of GTA 4. The links to all these videos should pop up in that little white or black box in the corner of your screen right about now. But if it doesn't for you, or if you're just watching this on a console or a smart TV or something, then I trust that you can just find these videos on my channel. Otherwise, if you want to get notified when I post my next video, then feel free to hit the subscribe button. Lastly, as this year comes to a close, I just want to go ahead and thank each and every one of you who have been on this journey with me. A little over a year ago, I posted what would turn out to be my best performing video of all time, and that video was nothing more than just something different from my usual content that I just felt like making. I remember I even said that I had no real plans of shifting my style of content to videos of that nature, or at least not immediately, but when that video received 30,000 views in just a week or two, boosted my subscriber count from about 450 to over 1,000, and got my ass into the YouTube Partner Program, I decided to say, fuck it, I guess this is what I'm doing now. And I haven't regretted making that shift one bit. So many of you have been with me since that video, and you've continued to support me by watching, liking, and commenting on all my videos since then. And along the way, so many more of you have come along and stayed for the ride. So to those of you who are with me now, whether you've joined me in the past year when the Liberty City Stories video came out, or even when I was still making shitty Gang Beasts videos, thank you all so much for supporting me and giving me the chance I've fought to earn for over 6 years. And that's just to entertain you all for a living. 2023 was the beginning, and 2024 was something special. But I'm proclaiming now that 2025 will be the year of Doug. And with that, I want to thank you all one more time for watching. And not only do I hope you have a blessed day, but I hope you have a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, a Happy Kwanzaa, a Happy Eid, whenever the hell the next one of those is, a happy whatever other holiday you may celebrate, and a Happy New Year. This is your boy Doug the Dog 6, and I am signing off. See you all again in 2025.
The memories I still remember. Then I became a man, lost sight of who I am, but right in front of me was the answer. 'Cause on Christmas I feel joy, and I turn back to a boy. The answer is to stay young forever. This is not a Christmas, this is not a Christmas song, this is not a Christmas, this is not a Christmas song, this is not a Christmas, this is not a Christmas song, this is not a Christmas, this is not a Christmas song.